My name is Darlene Hutchins. I'm 38 years old, and I was standing in a funeral home holding a USB drive that my dead father had specifically instructed his lawyer to give me, and only me, with one condition attached to it. Play it if your sister starts crying. I want you to understand what that sentence felt like in the moment. I had just watched Mitchell Conover, a 61-year-old estate attorney who has probably seen every version of family dysfunction that exists in the state of West Virginia, look me directly in the eyes and say those words with the particular steadiness of a man delivering something he has been carrying for a long time. And behind me, maybe 20 feet away, my sister Tamara was already crying. Had been crying since she landed in Charleston 3 days earlier. Was, at that precise moment, surrounded by four people whose hands were on her simultaneously, like she was a small, beautiful emergency that everyone had instinctively rushed toward. I closed my fingers around the drive. I didn't play it there. I didn't play it that day. I put it in the inside pocket of my blazer, right next to my mother's watch, and I went back to making sure people signed the guest book. Because that was the kind of thing that didn't happen if someone didn't make sure it happened. And in my family, that someone had always been me. Before I go any further, if you're already feeling something watching this, if something in those first few sentences landed somewhere specific inside you, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe, because this story is not short and I don't want you to lose it halfway through. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. You probably already know who that person is. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely asking. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this really starts. I grew up in Beckley, West Virginia, in a 3-bedroom house that smelled like cigarette smoke and instant coffee, and the particular silence of a man who loved his children in a language none of us could quite translate. My father, Gerald, was a logistics supervisor for a coal company, a man who could coordinate the movement of 300 tons of material without blinking, but who could not say the words, "I'm proud of you," without his face doing something uncomfortable first. My mother, Patsy, died when I was 14, and after that the house reorganized itself around her absence in ways nobody ever talked about. My father grieved by becoming more efficient. I grieved by becoming more useful. And my sister Tamara, who was 10 when our mother died, grieved by becoming the thing our father didn't know how to refuse. I want to be fair to all of us, because we were all just doing what we knew how to do. But I also want to be honest, because that's the whole point of me sitting here telling you this. The truth is that Tamara and I grew up in the same house and had two completely different fathers. Her Gerald came to her school plays. Her Gerald drove 4 hours to Scottsdale when she went through something hard in her 20s. Her Gerald answered the phone on the first ring when she called. My Gerald, the one I had, said things like, "You're going to be fine, Darlene. You always are," and meant it as a compliment, and I let him believe that it landed that way, because making him feel bad about it would have cost me something I couldn't afford. Here's what I understood by the time I was 12. Being dependable meant being overlooked. The more I handled, the less anyone noticed I was handling it. The more I held together, the more it was assumed I didn't need anything holding. I internalized that so completely that I stopped noticing when I was hungry for something until the hunger became ordinary. It was just how I was built, I thought. Some people need and some people do. I was a doer. That was fine. That was just who I was. And if you have ever been the person in your family who holds things together while someone else gets held, I want you to stay with me right now, because what comes next is going to matter to you. If this is already hitting close to home, go ahead and hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe so you don't miss a single minute of this, and share it with someone who's spent their whole life being described as the strong one. Now let me keep going, because the story gets a lot more complicated before it gets anywhere near okay. I built my own life the way I built everything. Head down, no complaints, no audience. I got a partial scholarship to Marshall University when I was 17 and worked 22 hours a week at a copy and print shop to cover the rest. I graduated in 3.5 years. I got a job at a healthcare billing firm in Charleston that I have now been with for 11 years. And I am, without any exaggeration, the most competent person in that office. I know that because I have trained two people who were promoted over me. I bought my condo in 2016 during a market dip and paid it off in 7 years. None of this was celebrated. None of it was noticed in any particular way by the people it should have been noticed by. The one time I mentioned to my father that I'd paid off the mortgage, he said, "Good for you, Darlene. I always knew you were smart with money." And then he asked me if Tamara had mentioned whether she was coming home for Thanksgiving. That was the same year he went to Scottsdale for 4 days to hold Tamara's hand through something I didn't find out about until 6 months later. I'm not saying he was wrong to do that. I'm saying it didn't occur to him to wonder whether I might have needed something too. The person who did wonder was Roy Belcher. Roy had been my father's closest friend for nearly 60 years. They grew up 3 streets apart, came up in the same industry, carried the same regional accent and the same particular brand of West Virginia stoicism. Roy is 67 and a widower, and the kind of man who shows up at your door with food he cooked himself when something hard is happening, without calling first, because calling first gives you the chance to say you're fine. Roy was the one who called me the night after I made partner. Not made partner. I was never going to make partner, but the night I found out that someone I had personally mentored for 18 months had been promoted into a director role I had been quietly angling toward for 3 years. Roy called and I didn't answer, and he left a voicemail that said, "I know you're not picking up. That's fine. I just want you to know I see what you're doing over there. Don't stop." I saved that voicemail for 2 years. He came to stand beside me at the funeral without being asked. That's what Roy does. He appeared at my elbow somewhere between the receiving line and the guest book table, and he stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of him without either of us having to make it a thing. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Making sure people sign," I said. He nodded like that was a complete answer, which with me it was, and he stayed there, not talking, not going to check on Tamara, not drifting toward the cluster of former coworkers who were still circling my sister with their hands outstretched. He just stayed there. And I felt, I don't know, something small and important that I couldn't look at directly. The way you can't look at a very bright thing straight on. It was 14 minutes later that Mitchell touched my elbow. I knew who he was. We'd met twice before, both times brief and transactional, and I had respected him immediately for not adding emotional weight to what were fundamentally administrative interactions. He was holding a slim leather portfolio. He looked like a man who had been waiting to do something for a long time, and was finally, carefully, doing it. "Miss Hutchins," he said very quietly, "before the service, your father was specific." He opened the portfolio. Inside, in a small plastic bag, was a black USB flash drive, the size of my thumb. He placed it in my palm with the precision of a man performing a task he had rehearsed. "He recorded this 14 months ago," Mitchell said. "Written instruction. Give this to Darlene, only to Darlene." He paused. "And he said, play it if your sister starts crying." I looked down at the drive in my hand. Behind me, Tamara made a sound. Not loud, but audible. And I heard the soft shuffle of 3 more people moving toward her. I closed my hand around the drive and put it in my pocket. I made sure people signed the guest book. The service was everything I arranged it to be. The flowers were correct, white chrysanthemums and sprays of eucalyptus, because my father had once mentioned offhandedly that lilies gave him headaches, and I had written that down somewhere in the back of my brain 11 years ago and never let go of it. The music was a hymn I found on a notepad in his nightstand drawer, written in his cramped block printing, "How Great Thou Art." Not sentimental, just specific. The pastor, who had met my father exactly once in a hospital corridor, read from notes I had prepared and delivered them with enough conviction that 3 people in the 3rd row cried during the scripture portion. The programs were printed on cream cardstock. The guest book was signed by 41 people. I know because I counted. Tamara's eulogy was beautiful. I need to say that clearly because this story is not about pretending otherwise. She told a story about our father teaching her to drive a stick shift in the parking lot of a Kmart that closed in 2009, the particular way he white-knuckled the door handle every time she stalled the engine, and how he never once raised his voice, just quietly said, "Clutch, Tamara. Give it the clutch like a man reciting something sacred." People laughed at exactly the right moment. Then they cried at exactly the right moment. She has always known how to do that. Find the room's frequency and match it perfectly. Fill every available inch of the emotional space. I sat in the front row and listened and thought, I did not know he taught her that. I didn't know they had that. And then I thought, what did we have? I didn't have an answer. That was the problem I had been carrying for 9 days since the hospice nurse called me at 6:14 in the morning to tell me he was gone. What did Gerald Hutchins and his oldest daughter have? We had efficiency. We had an unspoken agreement that I would handle things and he would let me, and neither of us would make it into more than it was. We had a relationship conducted almost entirely in the language of tasks completed and problems solved, and I had told myself for 38 years that this was a dialect of love, and standing there at his funeral, I still wasn't sure if I was right or wrong about that. The drive was in my pocket through all of it. I was aware of it the way you're aware of a loose tooth, not constant but always there when your tongue finds it. After the burial, short and cold and final, the ground in Beckley still half frozen in early March, the gathering moved to Roy's house. I had arranged that too, because my father's house was already in the process of being assessed for the estate. That assessment had been initiated, I had recently learned, by a phone call Tamara made to Mitchell Conover's office 3 weeks before my father died. While he was still in hospice. While he was still, technically, alive and capable of hearing a telephone ring from the next room. I found out about that phone call by accident. Mitchell mentioned it in passing while we were reviewing paperwork, in the tone of a man who assumed I already knew. I had kept my face completely still and said, "Right," and moved on to the next document. And driven home that night with both hands on the wheel and the radio off and not thought about it again until right now, standing in Roy's kitchen, repackaging a casserole from an aluminum pan into a proper ceramic dish because the aluminum was ugly and I needed something to do with my hands. That's when Tamara appeared in the doorway. Her mascara was freshly applied. Her voice was careful, not aggressive, but carrying that particular quality I had known my whole life. The quality of a woman who believes she is owed information and is deciding how directly to ask for it. "I saw you talking to Mitchell before the service," she said. "He gave me something from Dad," I said. I moved the casserole. "What kind of something?" "I haven't opened it yet, Darlene." There it was, the shift. We're both his daughters. There shouldn't be things that are... There are a lot of things, I said very quietly, and I need to handle them on a reasonable timeline, not today. Her eyes filled, quickly, easily, the way water finds a low place. She pressed her lips together and nodded and said, "I just want to feel like we're in this together." "I know," I said. "I did know. That's the thing about Tamara that I have never been able to fully explain to anyone. She is not lying when she says things like that. She genuinely wants to feel like we're in it together. She also wants to know what's on the drive. Both of those things are true at the same time, and she has never developed the ability to tell them apart, and I am not sure she ever will." I served the casserole. I thanked people for coming. I drove back to Charleston alone. I want to stop here for a second, because I think this is the moment, this specific moment, standing in Roy's kitchen moving food from one dish to another, while my sister watched me with those wide blue eyes, where I finally understood what the last 4 years of my life had actually been. Not a misunderstanding, not a family that communicated poorly, a pattern, a consistent, reliable, invisible pattern of one person doing the quiet work and another person standing close enough to absorb the credit. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I think some of you have been in that kitchen, have been the one moving the casserole while someone else held the room. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. Have you ever watched someone take credit? Not dramatically, not loudly, just by standing in the right place at the right moment, for something you built? Something you arranged, managed, held together? Drop it in the comments. Tell me what that felt like. I read every single one, and right now, in this story, your answer matters more than you know. That night, I sat in my condo with the door locked and the lights on and my blazer still on because I forgot to take it off. The drive sat on my kitchen counter for 47 minutes while I made tea I didn't drink and reorganized the cabinet above the refrigerator that didn't need reorganizing. Then, I got my laptop. Plugged in the drive, one file, a video, 14 months old. I clicked it. My father's face filled the screen. Gerald Hutchins, 66 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in Beckley, the table where I did my homework for 12 years. He looked better than he had in the final weeks, still himself, still wearing the expression he wore when he was about to say something he had no practice saying. He cleared his throat. He looked directly into the camera. "Darlene," he said, "I'm doing this because Mitchell tells me it's the only legal way to say some things outside the will. And because I'm not going to be able to say it in person. I've tried. You know me. You know I can't." He paused. The kitchen was quiet behind him. I could see the coffee maker on the counter, the one I had bought him in 2018 because his old one was burning the coffee. "Your sister is going to contest the will. I know she is. I know her. She's going to say she was closer to me. She's going to say she sacrificed more. She might even believe it." He reached forward and picked up something from the table, a piece of paper. He held it up. It was covered in his cramped block printing, the same handwriting that had written, "How great thou art," on the notepad in his nightstand. "Every time you did something for me and didn't say anything about it," he said, "I wrote it down. I started in 2019 when I realized I had never once said thank you out loud. I've been writing it down ever since." He began to read from the list. The furnace filter I had replaced in January of 2020 without being asked, because I noticed during a visit that it hadn't been changed in over a year. The time I stayed on the phone with him for 2 hours when he couldn't figure out his Medicare supplemental paperwork and never mentioned it again. The birthday card I sent every single year, the only one he received, with a stamp that was always a different design because I chose them specifically. 17 items. His flat, specific, completely dry voice reading each one like a man filing a report. I did not realize I was crying until something dropped from my chin onto the keyboard. The final item on the list. Took 3 days off work when I was in the hospital in March of 2021 and slept in the waiting room chair. Never mentioned it. Never asked for anything in return. That's the one I think about the most. He looked back at the camera. "You're going to be fine, Darlene," he said. "You always are. But I need you to know that I know the difference between fine and invisible." I should have said it louder. I should have said it a long time ago. The recording ended. I sat in front of my laptop for a long time. The kitchen cabinet I had reorganized was open. The tea was cold. My blazer was still on. Outside, it was 11:15 and the street was completely quiet. I called Roy. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't ask me to. "He made a list," I finally said. Roy was quiet. "I know," he said. "He told me he was going to." Tamara filed the contest 11 days after the funeral. I found out at 7:53 in the morning, on a Tuesday, when Mitchell called my cell while I was sitting at my desk eating the same breakfast I eat every day. Greek yogurt with a spoonful of honey, black coffee in the thermos I've carried to work for 6 years. I looked at his name on the screen and felt something drop in my chest before I even answered. He told me the basis of the contest: undue influence, diminished capacity. The argument that Gerald Hutchins, in the final months of his life, had been manipulated into disposing of his estate in a way that did not reflect his actual wishes. The primary target of that argument was the clause leaving the house and the majority of the liquid assets to me, with a structured buyout option for Tamara at a fixed valuation. A clause I had not known the specifics of until that exact phone call. "He never told me," I said. "He didn't want you to feel burdened by it," Mitchell said. "He said, and I'm quoting him directly, that you would spend the next 3 years quietly making sure Tamara got what she needed if you knew in advance, and he wasn't willing to let you do that." I put my yogurt down. I sat with that sentence for a moment the way you sit with something cold, feeling the temperature of it move through you slowly. My father had known me well enough to protect me from my own instincts, had planned for it, written it into the architecture of his estate, and then recorded a video so that I would understand why. He had done all of this alone, in a lawyer's office, 14 months before he died, without telling me, without asking for my input, without giving me the chance to talk him out of it. He had just quietly done it. Mitchell then told me something else. Something he had not mentioned at the funeral because, as he said, the timing would have been wrong. There was a second document. A notarized statement of testamentary capacity and intent, witnessed by two separate physicians, prepared specifically in anticipation of a legal challenge. The drive was the supporting record. Gerald had built the entire case himself, from inside a hospice, because he knew his younger daughter well enough to know she would fight it. He was specific, Mitchell said, with what sounded like quiet admiration. He was specific, I agreed. I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists for about 30 seconds, went back to my desk and finished my breakfast. Then I opened my laptop and started working. Here is what I want you to understand about the weeks that followed. I did not fall apart. I want to be honest about that, not because I'm proud of it, but because I think there's a version of this story where the protagonist crumbles and has to be pieced back together, and that is genuinely not what happened. I am not built for crumbling. What I am built for is sitting down at a table with a complicated problem and working it until it yields, and that is exactly what I did. I met with Mitchell 3 times over the following 2 weeks. I read every document he put in front of me. I asked specific questions and wrote down the answers. I organized everything into a folder on my laptop: estate documents, the physician statements, a time-stamped transcript of the video recording that Mitchell's office had prepared. I backed the folder up in 2 separate places. I ate my meals. I went to work. I slept 6 hours a night, which for me is normal. Roy came over on a Wednesday evening with a pot of soup he'd made himself, chicken and white beans, the kind his wife used to make. He sat at my kitchen table while I ate and didn't say much. At one point, he looked at the folder open on my laptop and said, "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for this for a long time," I said. "I just didn't know what I was getting ready for." He nodded, picked up his coffee cup, set it down. "She called me," he said, "Tamara, 2 days ago. Asked me if I thought Gerald was in his right mind at the end." I looked at him. "What did you say?" "I said I was with him the day he made that recording, drove him there myself, and that he was the clearest thinking man in the room, including me." Roy paused. "She didn't call back." I almost smiled. It was the closest I had gotten. The call from Tamara came on a Thursday afternoon, direct to my cell, not routed through attorneys. It rang 4 times, and I almost let it go to voicemail, and then I picked up, because avoiding it felt like something she would do, and I had spent my whole life making sure I didn't move like her. "I know about the drive," she said. Her voice was flat in a way I had never heard before. No performance, no register of practiced emotion, just her voice, stripped of everything she usually upholsters it with, and underneath all of that, it was surprisingly similar to mine. "It exists," I said. "Are you going to use it?" "I'm going to do what Dad asked me to do with it." Silence. 6, maybe 7 seconds of it. "Was it bad?" she asked. "What he said?" And here is the moment I have thought about more than any other moment in this entire sequence of events. Because I made a decision in that silence. A decision that is, for me, the equivalent of someone else climbing a mountain. I told her the truth. "It wasn't bad about you," I said. "It was good about me. There's a difference." She didn't say anything for a long time. "I didn't know he was going to leave it the way he did," she said finally. "The estate. I thought it would be split." "I know," I said. I was there for him, Darlene. I flew out. I called. Tamara." I said her name very gently, the way you set something fragile on a table. "I know you were there. I know you loved him. This isn't about that." Another silence. Longer this time. "Then what's it about?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the last word. Not performed, not managed, just cracked, the way a voice does when someone is finally asking a question they are genuinely afraid to have answered. I thought about the list. 3 pages, 17 items. A furnace filter, a Medicare form, a birthday stamp chosen specifically every year, the only card he received. It's about what he saw, I said. That's all. I want to stop here, right here in the middle of that phone call, because this is the moment, the exact moment. I need you to feel what I was feeling. Not victory, not satisfaction, not the clean, bright feeling of being right. I was sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and the folder open on the table above me, and I was talking to my sister, who I have spent 34 years watching be loved more loudly than me, and for the first time in all of those years, she sounded like someone who was not entirely sure she deserved what she had been given. And I don't have a cleaner word for it. I felt grief. For both of us. For the family we could have been if our father had known how to speak to both of his daughters in a language they could actually hear. If that hit you somewhere that doesn't have a name, if you know exactly what it feels like to grieve something you never actually had, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what comes next is the part that took me the longest to understand, and I need you still here for it. Tamara withdrew the contest 14 days later. No public statement, no explanation filed with the court. Mitchell sent me an email at 9:41 on a Friday morning. She withdrew. Gerald would be unsurprised. I read that email at my desk. I closed my laptop. I went to the break room, made myself a second cup of coffee, which I never do, and stood at the window looking at the parking lot for about 4 minutes. Someone had left their headlights on. I didn't know whose car it was, so I couldn't do anything about it. I stood there looking at those headlights for the full 4 minutes, and then I went back to my desk. That evening I drove to Beckley. I hadn't been back since the burial. I parked in front of my father's house. Dark, locked, a realtor's lockbox already on the front door handle, and I sat in the car and looked at it. The porch light was off. The driveway was empty. The azalea bush on the left side of the porch that my mother had planted in 1987 was already showing the first pale beginnings of buds, because it was mid-March now, and the ground was starting to come back. My father had lived in that house for 39 years. He had fixed the furnace himself 3 times before I started checking the filter. He had sat at that kitchen table and written a list of every quiet thing I had ever done in his cramped block printing, and then driven himself to his lawyer's office and turned it into something that would last after he couldn't. I thought about the woman on the screen, his face. I know the difference between fine and invisible. I got out of the car. I walked up the porch steps. I sat down on the top step, the one that has always creaked, the one I used to sit on as a kid when I needed to be outside but not far. And I put my hands on my knees, and I breathed the March air, which in Beckley smells like thawing mud and coal dust, and something green trying to happen underneath all of it. I stayed there until it was dark. Then I drove home. The consequences came without me doing anything to cause them. That is the part I want to be careful about, because I think there is a version of this story where I engineered something, where I made calls, sent emails, quietly arranged for the truth to distribute itself through the right channels at the right time. I did not do that. What I did was handle my father's estate with Mitchell's guidance, respond to every legal communication through proper channels, and go to work every day and eat my lunch and come home. The truth moved on its own, the way it tends to do in small communities where everyone is eventually connected to everyone else by 2 or 3 people at most. The first thing I heard was from Roy, about 3 weeks after Tamara withdrew the contest. He called on a Sunday morning, which is when Roy calls when something has happened that he thinks I should know, but isn't sure I want to. "Ran into Connie Aberhart at the grocery store," he said. Connie Aberhart was my father's neighbor for 22 years, the woman who had brought the casserole in the aluminum pan to the gathering at Roy's house. She asked me how the estate settled. I told her it settled the way Gerald wanted it to. She said she figured as much, because she'd heard that Tamara had tried to, and I'm using Connie's word here, grab more than her share, and it hadn't gone the way she planned. I was quiet for a moment. How did Connie know? "Connie knows everything," Roy said, which is not an explanation but is entirely accurate. I didn't ask what else Connie knew. I didn't need to. In Beckley, West Virginia, in a neighborhood where my father had lived for 39 years, among people who had watched him shovel their driveways and fix their lawnmowers and bring casseroles of his own to their doors when their parents died. The story of what Tamara had tried to do with his estate did not stay quiet. Not because I told anyone, because the people who had watched Gerald Hutchins live his life had strong feelings about what he would have wanted for it after he was gone, and they said so, to each other, in the way that people in small communities say things, at grocery stores and church parking lots, and the waiting room of the one decent diner on the main street that hasn't closed yet. I did not celebrate this. I want to be clear about that. What happened to Tamara's reputation in Beckley was not something I wanted or engineered, and when Roy told me about it, I felt something uncomfortably close to sorrow, because the Tamara that those people were talking about in grocery stores was my sister. The one who told the story about the Kmart parking lot and the clutch. The one who, underneath all of the performance and the calculation, had loved our father in her own real way, and would spend the rest of her life not being entirely sure whether he had loved her back in the same proportion. That is a hard thing to carry. I know because I carried a version of it for 38 years. Mine was the question of whether I was seen. Hers is the question of whether she was actually the favorite, or just the loudest. Those are both lonely questions, and neither of them has a clean answer. About 6 weeks after the contest was withdrawn, I got a text from a woman named Brenda Howell, who had been my closest friend in high school before life redistributed us into different cities and different calendars. We had stayed loosely in touch, birthday texts, the occasional comment on a photograph, but hadn't had a real conversation in probably 4 years. Her text said, "I heard about your dad. I heard about all of it. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Can I call you?" I stared at that text for about a minute. Then I typed back, "Yes." She called that evening and we talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes, which I know because my phone logged it. She told me she had moved back to Charleston the previous fall to take care of her own mother, who was declining in a slow, grinding way that Brenda was handling alone. We talked about that for a long time, about what it costs to be the one who handles things, about the particular exhaustion that lives behind your eyes when you have been capable for too long without anyone noticing. She made me laugh twice, which I had not done in approximately 6 weeks. When we finally hung up, she said, "Same time next week?" And I said, "Yeah," and I meant it. That was a return worth having. Not because Brenda apologized for 4 years of distance. She didn't, and I didn't need her to. But because she showed up specifically, acknowledged what had happened specifically, and asked for something real going forward. That is different from someone showing up and saying, "I'm sorry, I should have been better," and then expecting the acknowledgement of their remorse to function as a relationship. The other return was harder. My father's younger brother, Uncle Derek, called me about 2 months after the funeral. Derek is 61 and has his own complicated history with Gerald. They had a falling out in 2014 over something I was never told the full details of, and had not spoken in years. He called from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't pick up. When I heard his voice, I felt the particular wariness of someone who has learned to wait before deciding what a phone call means. He said, "I should have come to the service. I know that. I'm not calling to explain why I didn't, because there isn't an explanation that would hold up. I'm calling because your daddy talked about you to me, back before everything went sideways between us. And I want you to know that." I didn't say anything. "He said you were the one who got his best qualities," Derek said. "His steadiness, his ability to keep going. He said it like it was the highest thing he could think of to say about a person." I sat with that for a moment. "Thank you for calling, Derek," I said. We talked for about 20 minutes. We did not resolve the years of silence. We did not make plans. But we acknowledged each other across the distance of all of it, and that was something I put in the same category as Roy's soup and Brenda's 2-hour phone call. Small, specific, real. I did not call Tamara back. She has not called me. We exist right now in the same silence we have always existed in, except that the silence is different now. It has been named, at least between the two of us, even if we haven't found the language for what comes next. I am not angry at her. I am also not pretending I am not watching to see whether she becomes someone capable of a real conversation, the kind that doesn't have an agenda underneath it. I'm waiting, but I'm not waiting the way I used to wait, with my whole life on pause, holding space for something that might never arrive. I'm waiting the way you wait for weather. It might change. It might not. Either way, I have things to do. About 3 months after the funeral, I sat down at my kitchen table on a Sunday evening and I wrote Tamara a letter. Not an email, a letter, on paper, in my own handwriting. I didn't plan it. I just sat down and started writing, and this is, more or less, what I said. I don't need you to agree with me about what happened. I don't need you to believe that Dad saw things the way the recording shows he saw them. What I need, if we're going to be sisters in any real sense going forward, is for you to stop asking me to make myself smaller so that you can feel more comfortable. I have been doing that my whole life, and I am not going to do it anymore. Not because I'm angry, because I finally understand that it was never actually helping either of us. I put it in an envelope. I addressed it. I put a stamp on it, one of the ones with a painting of a bird on it, a cedar waxwing, because I liked the way it looked. I mailed it on a Monday morning on my way to work. She has not responded. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. The letter is not waiting for a response. The letter is just the truth, mailed. Roy read it before I sent it. I read it to him over the phone on the Sunday evening I wrote it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That sounds like you." Which is, from Roy Belcher, the highest possible form of praise. And now I want to tell you the last part. A few weeks ago, I was at my father's house for what will probably be the last time before it sells. I went to collect the remaining personal items that needed to be sorted, a box of my mother's things that had been in the top of the closet for 24 years, some tools in the garage, the coffee maker I had bought him in 2018. I moved through the rooms slowly, which is not how I usually move through anything. In the kitchen, I stood at the table where he recorded the video. The chair where he sat was pushed in. The notepad where he had written the hymn was still on the counter. I had left it there after the funeral, and nobody had moved it. I picked it up, turned it over. On the back, in the same cramped block printing, was one more line. Not the hymn title, something else. "Tell Darlene I kept the birthday stamps." I stood there for a long time. He had kept them. Every stamp from every card I had sent for however many years I had been sending them, saved somewhere, in the way that people save things they don't know how to talk about. I found them in the top drawer of his bedroom dresser, in a small white envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. 31 stamps. One for every year I had been old enough to send a card on my own. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I finished sorting the boxes. I locked the house. I sat in the car in the driveway and held the envelope in both hands, and I talked to him. Not out loud, just in the way you talk to people who aren't there anymore, in the part of your mind that still expects them to answer. "You should have told me," I said, "but you tried. At the end, you tried." My name is Darlene Hutchins. I'm 38 years old, and I know now that being seen doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a USB drive handed to you at a funeral. Sometimes it looks like 31 stamps in a white envelope in a dresser drawer. Sometimes it looks like a man who couldn't say the words, sitting alone in his kitchen and writing down every quiet thing you ever did, one by one, so that at least somewhere it was recorded. So that somewhere the work was counted. I carry my mother's watch on my left wrist. I carry the envelope of stamps in the wooden box at home where I keep things that matter. I go to work. I make my coffee. I talk to Roy on Sundays and Brenda on Thursdays, and I am building, slowly and specifically, the kind of life where the people around me know what I am actually carrying, not because I perform it, but because I finally let them close enough to see. Before I go, I want to ask you something real. Has someone ever quietly protected you, or seen you, in a way you only understood after it was too late to thank them for it? A parent, a friend, someone who kept a record of you that you didn't know existed? Leave it in the comments. Tell me the story or just tell me the feeling. I read every single one, and right now, after everything I just shared with you, I want to know yours. And if this story stayed with you, if Darlene and her father and that little envelope of stamps meant something to you today, Please hit the like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and share this with someone who has spent their whole life being the capable one, the steady one, the one everyone assumes is fine. They might need to hear that someone kept the stamps. They might need to know that being quiet about your love doesn't always mean you don't feel it. It just means you ran out of time to say it the right way. Don't let that be your story. Say it now, while you can.